All right, so we're back from our break, and I have finished the majority of my level block out. And let's start with a tour. So I'll hit play. I'm standing on the front porch. I can enter through this doorway and look around. Maybe on this wall we'll have some coat hangers and things of that nature. And maybe over in this nook there can be a place for people's shoes. Maybe there'll be a picture on this wall. Who knows? We'll have to use our imagination. So I divided this up so that we can have sort of like a living room in here that's going to have a television set and some furniture ultimately. And then over here is, I think, where I'm going to have the main part of the kitchen, okay? If indeed it turns out to be a kitchen. This is just going to be more living space. I haven't decided yet exactly how I'm going to use that. And way over here is our utility room. Okay, what's this? I'll have to close that off. I guess I overlooked that part. But here's our little utility room. And it's kind of dark in here, so we're going to have to address that with some lights. Also, I did in fact decide to implement a second floor, but I want to show you a certain problem first. I would like to be able to climb these stairs. And by the way, there is a basic staircase mesh that is included in Unreal Engine. But watch what happens when I try to climb them. Well, I passed right through them. And in fact, if I turn my camera around, I can see that I'm underneath the staircase. So I'll explain to you why that happens in just a moment. But in light of that happening, I decided to make use of that space underneath the stairs for maybe another little, another place with a door that we can put things. Okay, so let me find the thing that I overlooked and fix it. I think that was right about here. Okay, so find that right about there. Okay, and I'll just borrow one of these walls right here. Okay, so option dragging in toward us, like so. Sometimes it's hard to get a perfect angle on that. I guess I could just close that off like that. Okay, and what about back here? That still looks good. Okay, so let me play the game again and make sure that I haven't overlooked anything else. Notice it's considerably darker inside of here than it was before. And I have to fix the problem that I can't climb on these stairs. So that's the first thing that I'm going to address right now. For stairs, what you're going to need to do, there's actually multiple ways of making it so that you can climb stairs. What we're having right now is an issue with something called collision. Collision is a big topic in Unreal Engine and in 3D software. So I want to give you an example, a very basic example of what I mean by collision. So in order to do this, I'll go back to my content directory, and I'm going to go into Starter Content and choose the Meshes folder. Where is that? Or maybe it's Props, I'm sorry, Props. Okay, so there is inside of here, I think, a big rock, static mesh underscore rock. So I'm going to drag that and just put it into the scene there. So we've got a big old rock. Now if I go in and play again, I happen to know that that rock does not have collision. And collision is basically an invisible volume that is around the mesh that, among other things, will prevent something like a character from being able to walk right through it. Now, I should be able to walk through this rock immediately because I already know that it does not have a collision volume around it. Right. And if this was a real rock, I would not be able to pass through it. These walls do have collision. You can see that they were added by Epic. I think that Epic deliberately took some of the starter content. This is just speculation on my part, but I think that what Epic did is they took some of the starter content and deliberately excluded certain features to encourage users to learn how to do these things and set up these things for themselves. So let me show you a basic example of adding collision to that static mesh. Here it is again. The thumbnail didn't appear for whatever reason before, and I can either double-click it here or double-click it here in the Details panel to bring up the static mesh editor. Okay, so let's do that, and I've got my static mesh editor for this rock, and it has no collision at this point, but I can add collision to it using this menu. When I open up this menu, there are different forms of collision, and some of them are more complex than others. For example, 26 degrees of freedom is going to have more vertices. The more vertices, the more complicated or the more computationally intensive that collision is going to be. And something like this rock, I don't really think that this is a good use case for some complex collision. So we're going to remove what we've got on there, and I'm going to add something a lot simpler. Okay, we're going to do just maybe a box simplified collision. And you can see the wireframe is just a little box that's around that. And I think that that should be at least sufficient to prevent our character, at least, from being to walk right through that mesh. So I'm going to save the mesh with that collision volume applied. And when I return to my main level, when I walk up to this rock, I will not be able to walk through it. Okay? It's blocking me just like it normally would if it was a real rock. Okay? So some of the meshes in starter content have collision and some of them don't. So I'm going to delete this rock out of our world and point out once again that the stairs, and by the way, in a moment I'll show you where I found those stairs. Yeah, they just don't have it. I don't think the stairs are in starter content. Let me see if I can find them. Stairs. Yeah, I'm sorry, they are in starter content. So what it is, it's like one little flight. So what I did is I just stacked up lots of them, and what you can see here is I just covered this up with a ramp shape that I scaled proportionally, just so that it would cover up the gap in between there. This is not an advanced mesh of any kind. It's just functional. I would think of this as just basically a level block out, and some of these rudimentary meshes can be replaced with very, very high-end static meshes. All right, before I get too far on other tangents, I want to address something that I neglected to address in part 1, which is the fact that you've done all this work, but you may not have saved your map, which is why I did not want you to close the editor before you moved on to part 2. So let me just clear that out for a second. I hope you remember that in the base content directory, we've got this third-person folder. And if we double-click there, we can see that there is a maps subdirectory. Now, I honestly did save my map, and you can see that there are 2 maps in here right now. The third-person map is the default third-person playground that you get with the template. But when we made our new level, I saved it and I called it House. And every time I make modifications in here, you're going to see there's going to be an asterisk, and I'm going to need to save that. So once you've made your new level, all you have to do is in the File menu, you have to choose Save Current Level As, give it a name, and then make sure that it ends up inside of this maps directory, okay? So I'll just modify this, and I'll call this house2. Save. Okay, so that's how you would do it. In fact, right now there's no difference between house 1 and house 2, so I'm going to go ahead and open up house 2, and it's exactly the same. If I want to make this the permanent map that will load every time I load up this project, remember we can do that in project settings. So house 2, I'll open up my project settings, and I want you to take note that I've left this map highlighted. So in the project settings, there's this tab called Maps and Modes. We can click that, and there are two things, the editor startup map and the game default map. I am going to use the selected asset, which is this highlighted. I can use either one of these. So I'll use house 2, I might as well. It's still highlighted, so I can use the selected asset from content browser button and just pop that in there. And we do not even have to save that. I mean, of course, we do have to save any progress we make as we change things here in our level, but we don't have to save when we make any changes in the project settings. Okay, now there's a few things that I want to also tell you about how we can further improve the lighting in here. When it comes to lights, there are different modes that we can have. For example, I will bring in, let's just take a point light, for example. And this is one type of light that's available in Unreal Engine. Usually what I like to do with all of my lights is to set them to movable. This is called their mobility settings, movable. And movable lights, let me just reduce the attenuation radius on this light. Movable lights are fully dynamic, and if they are in the vicinity of something that would cast a shadow, the shadows will be cast appropriately, and they're fully dynamic and react to anything that may be in the game. Static lighting requires something called a lighting build. This is also referred to as baked lighting. Baked lighting does not interact in real time with dynamic gameplay elements or dynamic objects in your level. Stationary is sort of some place in between these two, and I will explain stationary lighting in a future lesson. But I tend to, by the way, this also requires baked lighting. So in order to not have to build lighting constantly, all of my lights I want to be set to movable. So let's delete this one and look at the lights that we've got so far. One nice thing about the World Outliner is that it has this button, which is a filter, and you can look at certain types of actors and not other types of actors. So I'm going to open that up and filter just for lights, You can even specify which kinds of lights, but right now I only want to see the small number of lights that are in my level. And I've got a directional light and I've got a skylight. Let's set both of those. Oh, it looks like I already have done so. I've set their mobility to movable, so that's good. Now, in order for this to work properly as it relates to the static meshes in our level, we also have to make those meshes movable. And we already have a whole bunch of static meshes in this level. For example, we've got many floor pieces. Look at that. Tons of them. We even have things that are grouped. The pickup truck and the ramps that I made for the staircase, the stairs themselves, everything. The first thing I'm going to do, I think, is to make a multi-selection of all the group actors right now by shift-clicking. So I click one, I'll show you that again. Let's start with group actor number 1. And I'm going to shift-click down to group actor 13. So remember, to ungroup them, I have to click or hold down Shift and press G. And now all of those static meshes are again separated. Now what I would like to do is I'm going to filter again for just static meshes. Okay, so geometry, static mesh, actor. Here are all of the static meshes, and I'm going to group them all together, all of them. So I can do this in one fell swoop, okay? With all of those highlighted, I'm going to click Movable. And now every static mesh in this entire world is movable, and it will react to movable lights in the appropriate way. So this would be a good time to click Save All, now that I've done that. Something else that you might consider doing while you're looking at all of your static meshes. We haven't placed any individual lights inside of here. Remember, all the light is coming from the outside and coming in through the windows. But something that I didn't account for when I made this environment is that there is no landscape outside. All I did is I made this front porch, and it was snapped basically to the world origin. If I were to create a landscape right now, it would intersect and possibly cause Z-fighting with the landscape. So one workaround for this is to temporarily group all the static meshes that you have. And I'll select them all and use the shortcut Control-G. And that is everything now together. Okay, everything. I'm going to use the gizmo just to bring this up. And we're going to create a basic landscape that we can place this house down onto. Now, there's a lot to know about making sophisticated landscapes, and we're not going to be covering landscape creation in detail today, but I'll show you the basics. Now, we're going to use this modes selector right here, and we are in selection mode. Open that, left click, and choose landscape. Okay, and you'll see this grid right here. And in fact, it looks like my static mesh group of my house is still underneath the world origin. So usually what happens is that when you create a new landscape, you're going to want to make sure, it looks like I was already messing with this. So it's going to default to 63 by 63 quads, which is very, very large. For now, I'm going to recommend that you do something smaller, maybe 31 by 31. And it wants a landscape material. Now, landscape material is a special kind of material, but you can also use ordinary materials temporarily. So for now, I'll use starter content. I'll go into my materials folder, and I'm going to find just the grass, material, ground grass, and use the use selected asset from content browser button. And just simply hit create. And you're going to see this shadowy looking cursor right now, and this is going to default to a tool that is used for sculpting surface topology on a landscape, and I don't want you to accidentally do that yet. So as soon as you have the landscape showing up, please go right back into selection mode. And let's zoom out a little bit, and I can highlight my group of static meshes that constitutes this entire house that I've built, and maybe move it to something that's a little bit more centralized. I'm not going to worry about perfection right now, but I'll zoom out and get that on there. Now I can see that my frame rate is getting a little bit low, and the main reason for that is due to the fact that I am running my screen recorder at the same time as Unreal Engine is running. So for now, I'm going to go to the settings view and change my engine scalability settings. I'm going to click auto, and it's going to sort of assess the situation and maybe lower some of these settings for me. Cinematic, honestly, is usually overkill. So let's click auto. Okay, Epic is going to look very good, and now I can close that. So I'm much smoother in operation once again, and I don't really see an appreciable difference. So I'm just going to translate it down. You can see when it starts to intersect. We can even zoom in really close here. And we would prefer not to have Z-fighting. So that looks pretty good. And while my meshes are still grouped, I can Shift-G and I can ungroup them. And while I'm at it, I'm going to reset my filter. You see it's still filtered for static meshes only. So let's go ahead and click that and choose Reset Filters. And now we're back to everything that is in our world. So now let's go back in there. Oops. And my player start. I moved the house, so my player start is not where it's supposed to be anymore. So let's find where that is. Player start. Oh, yeah, it's underground. Okay, so let's just snap that end. And now I should be able to enter my dwelling. Fantastic. Okay, so now I want to add collision to these stairs so I can take you upstairs. And there is something that you can do for now. This is not the best way to do it, but it is an easy thing you could do. You can select all of the staircase meshes cumulatively just by holding down Shift. Okay, so that's what I'm doing right now. And what I can do is I can simply search in the Details panel for collision, and there's a thing here that says Collision Presets. And it's set to no collision, or it might be set to something else for you. But let's just set that together to block all. And again, this is not the best way. This is just a simple way. Also, we want to make sure that character can step up on is set to yes. Okay? And let's do a save all. This is not going to be perfect, but we'll talk about making collisions more perfect in a future lesson. But this will at least allow me to climb the staircase, even though it's going to be a little bit inelegantly. And so I've got another space up here, and this will be something. I don't know what it'll be yet, but we'll find out. Okay, so now we're going to start with decorating certain things. And remember, we are at an advantage because we built this very modularly, right? So I can define certain areas as having a particular material. Let's say I want a tile floor or something, linoleum floor in the kitchen, and I want a certain type of carpet in the living area, and maybe a certain type of paint on the walls, maybe different colors of paint in different rooms, and certain material for the ceiling. So we can do all of those things. In fact, even on the staircase mesh, you'll see that, let me clear my search in the Details panel, that mesh has two material elements. And if I open up that static mesh in the mesh editor, you can see that this is comprised of one material for the main geometry of the staircase, and it has the basic wall material assigned, and the steps themselves have M basic floor applied. But these can be any materials we desire. This could be something that is wood, and this could be something that is carpet, and we'll make those decisions in this part of the video. So let's start by getting back to our main tab and close these tabs that we do not need open for the time being. I'm going to leave Bridge open because we're going to be perhaps getting some materials from there. So let's go back to our house and have a look around. I know that the floors are going to definitely have different materials. So let's go into our content directory, our base content directory, and we will make some, we'll make a world-aligned carpet material. So go into Bridge and please search for carpet. And we'll do like that and see what there is. Okay, here's a plush carpet. I'm fine with that. So let's download this at the highest quality settings. If yours says downloaded, it means you already have it in your Vault cache, but if not, take the time to click download and allow that to happen. Once it has downloaded, this add button should illuminate. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click add. Now here we've got that carpet, but it's not world aligned, and I prefer making world aligned materials. So I'll make a new material right here, and this will reinforce your memory about how we did it before. I'll type m underscore my carpet underscore 001. My carpet underscore 001. And I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to open up this empty material, and I'm going to dock it. Now let's see how easy this is. Once again, we're going to need all three of these textures, so I will select one of them and then shift-click the last one. Left-click and hold, drag up and hover over that tab for your material editor, and then let go. Now we're going to have to organize these so that the diffuse map or the albedo or the base texture is on the top, the normal map is in the middle, and the packed ORD map is on the bottom. These need to be converted for world aligned or triplanar projection. These have to be converted into what are called texture objects rather than texture samples. We're not going to manipulate the UVs in a conventional way. So it's simple. Right-click, convert to texture object. Right-click, convert to texture object. Right-click, convert to texture object. Now we need a world-aligned texture node. World-aligned. I start typing it, and sooner or later I'll find it. Here it's world-aligned texture. And I know that I'm going to need another one, so while that's highlighted, I'll hit Control-D to duplicate it, and I'll place it down here near our packed map. For the normal, we need something close, but not exactly the same. We need a world-aligned normal. So let's see if I can find that. World-aligned normal right here. It's almost the same thing. So each texture object gets plugged into the corresponding input on the world-aligned nodes. Okay? And then the XYZ texture of the first albedo texture can go into base color. The XYZ texture from the normal map can go into the normal. And we have to break the X, Y, and Z coordinates in this case. So we're going to pull off of this and type break out. What we want is break out float 3 components. And now I've got access to RG and B, red, green, and blue. The channels in this packed texture, I've mentioned this before. It is roughness. You have to think of RGB not in terms of color, but in terms of ORD. O stands for ambient occlusion. R stands for roughness. And D stands for displacement. And I will show you that very, very soon. It's a great feature, and you do need to know about it. But for now, we're not going to be making use of displacement. Now, to control the scale of all this stuff, what I now need is, you can see that the texture size is determined by a constant 3 vector. So I'll hold down the number 3 on the alphanumeric side of my keyboard and left-click. And now I've got a constant 3 vector. And when I downloaded this, I think I've made this point before, I tend to try to look to see if the texture size is given. And usually it's either 200 by 200 or 100 by 100. So in this case, I'm going to take a guess because I downloaded it at the highest quality. If it's not reported, I usually just type 200 in all 3 fields because I know that I'll be able to scale that later. To do that, we're going to pull off of the RGB pin and type the word multiply until we find a multiply math node. But because that's another one of those nodes that we use very, very frequently in materials, there's a very simple shortcut. I hold down M and left click. Now I need to plug the RGB out of this constant 3 vector into the A input of the multiply node. And I can set a value manually for B, but I'd rather have that be something that is adjustable. And for that, I need a scalar parameter. And of course I can pull off of B and search for scalar parameter, or I could just instead hold down the letter S and then left click and I get a scalar parameter, and I can even rename it. I'll call this texture size. And in this case, spaces are permitted. So let's plug that in. And we don't want to leave this with a default value of 0, because as soon as we multiply 200 by 0, we get 0. So I'm just going to set this to 1. So that's going to be its default texture size. Now I'll take the output of the multiply node and plug that in to the texture size inputs of each of these world-aligned nodes, texture size. And just clean up the look of this a little bit more, perhaps. I've seen things that look worse than this. All right, so that's just fine, and I'm going to apply and save. You know what? What we can do is we can add some other scalars, by the way. So I'm going to hold down S, make another scalar parameter. I'll name it metallic. And I'll plug that into the metallic pin. I think I'm going to definitely want this with a default value of 0. And I'll make another scalar, excuse me. And that will be for the specular value, which I'm also going to leave at 0 for this particular material. I'll hit apply and save. I do not want to use this carpet master material, my carpet. I want to instead right-click and make a material instance. And we can just move our cursor, move our cursor right after this M and add an uppercase I. Oh no, my keyboard battery, I think, is dying. Okay, I might pause the recording here for a second just to replace that, but it looks like it's okay right now. And I'm going to hit enter and then save the material instance. Okay, so on any tile that I place this on, it's going to take on that carpet appearance, but I don't want this area carpeted just yet. Let's start with the living room, and I'll add the carpet material instance onto every one of those tiles that we used to create this space. Maybe, did I go too far there? No, I think I like it out to there, but you know what I realized is maybe this partition should be further back, again, to separate the next room. Okay, and that looks awfully nice. Okay, so we can leave that as it is. This is going to be a kitchen, so that's going to be a different material. I don't think I'm going to want carpet here in the mud room, but maybe out here. That would look nice. So I'll take my material instance once again, and we'll carpet this section. You don't have to use this carpet. There's other carpet types on Quixel and also in the marketplace that you can get. Some are very, very good. Maybe even behind. And let's see. At least up to maybe the foot of the staircase. Okay. That's not bad. Speaking of the staircase, if I wanted these steps to have that same material on them, I could simply select the mesh and remember that it's got just two material elements. So I can replace the top one on each one of these instances. Or I can just locate that mesh and make it just part of that mesh permanently. So we're going to go for, I'll search for it, mi underscore my carpet. And that'll sort of cook it in. I can change this later if I simply open up this model. And for the other element, maybe we'll just use some starter content wood. So let's type wood and search for something. Walnut? I don't know. That's not world aligned either. Oak? We might be able to find something better and make our own. Okay, so some of these are okay. I think I like the shiny one, the polished looking one, just for the time being. And you can see that the pieces are much too big, okay? But now we've got a staircase, and you know what? I don't think there's enough contrast between the wood and the plush carpeting that is on the steps themselves. So I'm going to change my mind about that. So we'll find this again, and I'm going to double click this. And for this material element, I'm just going to go back to the wall for now. There are a lot of wall materials here. Bricks painted white? No. Basic wall. Okay. This will at least allow us to see that contrast more easily. So what is this like now? Looks a little bit more like stairs. Okay, and now I'm up here. So far, so good. Oh yeah, upstairs. Let's put carpeting up there. So we'll take our material instance and carpet everything up here. And in a moment, I will show you how to change the texture size on that carpet if that is what you want to do. I think I was not dragging my material instance. I got some of these wrong. Okay, let's make sure I got them right. Okay, material instance of my carpet. And it looks like something jutted out behind this partition, so I'm going to carpet that as well. That may not be visible. It actually is visible out here, but we're going to take care of that in a different way. Not to worry. And notice, by the way, that it is getting dark in here because as we add carpet, there is less light being absorbed. Or excuse me, there is more light being absorbed, less light being reflected. Because carpet absorbs more light than, I guess, whatever that wall material is. And for now, I'm just going to fill these gaps. And the size will be uniform because it's world aligned. Now, I want to remind you that because it's world aligned, okay, so first of all, I'm going to correct this problem next. Do you notice that it seems like I can see all right, but when I look down, everything goes really, really dark? I'm going to show you another example of that. Near the front door, and you can see that if I go into play mode, and I turn around and I face the door, Can you see how the illumination is changing over time? It's ramping up and it's ramping down. That is meant to simulate eye adaptation. And I almost don't know anybody in the world of development that likes that at all. And we can correct that. So let's fix that right now. We can use a special type of actor I think you've seen before called a post-process volume. So I'll search for it, post, and I'll drag one of these into my world. Once this is in here, this is good for all sorts of things, camera effects and whatnot. For the time being, let's search for INF, which stands for Infinite Extent Unbound. And this will have it affect the entire world. But we can also place and scale different post-process volumes in different rooms if we need for them to have different exposure. So now let's search for the exposure setting. Set this to manual. And now we can see the changes as we make them without having to play the game. Okay, so I turned that one all the way up. That's too bright outside. We'll fix that. But remember, there are also going to be actual lights placed in these rooms. As a matter of fact, here's a good way to get around that problem. For now, without getting too fancy, let's just place a point light in here, okay? So that we can really, really see around. We can think of this just as a work light. There's going to be ceiling lights and lamps or things of that nature, but right now at least this allows us to see. And I'll go down here, I'm going to go outside, and I'm going to readjust the exposure. So I've got to select that in my world and dial in the exposure that I like. Okay, so now we should be able to see in the upstairs area. Okay, or at least a little bit better. Okay, so from up there, I want to increase the radius of this light, set it to movable also. All of the lights should be set to movable. And we can increase its intensity and its attenuation radius, just so it fills more of the room. And that's okay for now. Still overexposed out here, I think, so let's go back outside near the door. And once again, select our post-process volume, search for exposure, and turn that still down further, because that was just too much, I think. Okay, now that looks good. Let's check if we can see upstairs. And yes, I can. But if I look down at the ground, it's not going to become black anymore. And if I look up at the ceiling, we're not having that, eye adaptation effect changing over time. And that was what I was trying to eliminate before. Okay? Looks like that's best handled with post-process volumes. And post-process volumes, again, can be nested. You can have post-process volumes even inside of other post-process volumes to have dynamic lighting changes where you need them. But we don't know if we need to do that yet until we fill the space with things like lights. And we're going to be talking about the different types of lights soon. I like that shadow, by the way. That's cool. Now that we're in here, the next thing that I want to talk about are the different kinds of lights, because that was the next thing that we talked about when I introduced this video. So let's go to this tab, Lights, okay? And you're going to see various types of lights. The directional light is already spoken for, and that is, in fact, I'll search for it, our sun. Okay, remember that's the thing that we were steering around by using Control L and deciding how the sun is going to be beaming in through the windows and its position in the sky. So that's spoken for. Now let's look at some other types of lights. A point light behaves much like a light bulb. And when I bring my lights into the world, because I want all of them to be dynamic, let's clear our search and make sure that the mobility is set to movable every time. It might be a little bit of a challenge at first to remember to do that, but if you miss a few, you can always find the ones that are not movable in your world outliner, okay? And therefore, you can select them and then set them to movable after the fact. So this behaves like a light bulb, and it emits light in all directions, as you can see here, okay? And I can change its intensity. The units are candelas in this case. And I can change its attenuation radius. And I can also change the source radius, okay? And the source radius is going to sort of represent the size of the light in the world. There's a whole science behind lighting theory, and this will affect the appearance of shadows in your world. Larger lights or larger light sources tend to cast softer shadows. The smaller the light source, the harder the edges of the shadows are going to be. So if I have an object in this space that's being lit by this light and casting a shadow, I can affect the way that shadow looks by changing the source radius. So let's just put in a placeholder mesh. I'm going to increase the intensity here a bit and the radius just so that we can see this happening. Let's take a placeholder mesh. What should it be? Let's use something in starter content, props. And how about the rock? The rock. So let's get that right on the ground. And we'll set it to movable as well. I'll grab my light again. Now you can see this is casting dynamic shadows. But as I move the light around, you can see that the edges of the shadows are pretty hard. But if I change the source radius, if I increase that, you can see that the shadows soften. They become softer as the source radius, which represents the size of the light, is increased and decreased, okay? So, but by default, a point light has a source radius of 0, okay? And you can see this is fully dynamically lit, and that is very cool. So we can control the appearance of our shadows that way. Other things that we can do with point lights, or any light for that matter, is we can change the color of the light. So if I wanted this to be something weird, I can make it any color that I want, just like those special light bulbs that you can buy that you can personalize the color. Okay, this is good when you're using lights in this way, by the way, and you're trying to create kind of like crazy looking environments, maybe like a nightclub or something like that where they've got colored lights flashing and stuff. That's a good option. Instead of hitting OK, I'm going to hit cancel in this case, and I'm going to delete the point light. You can experiment with point lights and placing multiple point lights throughout your level. For example, maybe I feel like there should be a point light over here, inside of that living room. Of course, I'd have to go way over there. But this is, I'm oversimplifying this deliberately right now. I just want you to get used to the behavior of the different kinds of lights. I'm not just going to be plopping in point lights everywhere. That's not going to be the right way to go. So let's delete that, and I'm also going to delete this point light. The next type of light is a spotlight, and it is exactly what you might imagine that it would be. You can rotate a spotlight to determine where it's casting its light, and you can rotate it on any axis, like so. Okay, so let's now look at this rock from this direction, and I'm going to move the spotlight farther away. You'll notice that it has a gradual fall off the farther away it is, okay? And of course, this also, you can adjust the intensity, right? So let's make it a brighter light. And I'm going to aim it more directly at the rock, like that. And again, it has hard shadows. Let's make this a movable light. Almost forgot. And again, the attenuation radius, that can be made larger or smaller. So let's make it at least big enough to where it affects the rock, but not so big that it affects everything behind the rock, okay? You can make that choice. Now for spotlights, we have control over an inner cone angle, which is this parameter, and an outer cone angle, and that will affect the fall off, okay? The fall off is basically what is in between the inner cone and the outer cone, all right? And that will determine how focused, so to speak, how focused our spotlight is going to be. So let's rotate that a little bit, or maybe I'll change my perspective a little bit. Let's put this someplace where we can see a hard shadow. Okay, so there's a pretty hard shadow right there, and we'll increase the intensity a little bit more, maybe increase the attenuation radius a little bit more. Okay, and again, you can see that that's a hard shadow, and if I select my light, again, I can adjust the source radius and soften the shadows if I choose, okay? So we can go from hard shadows to soft shadows, and that's, of course, just an artistic choice. Okay, so, and like the point light, we can change the color and do all sorts of things with these lights. If you want, you can explore and just try to mess with some of these parameters for lights and get something of an idea for what they do. But we'll go over them in detail at another time. But right now, we're just going over the basics. Okay, so hopefully now you understand what spotlights do, and I will delete that. The next light is called the rect light, and the rect light is interesting. Right now, I can tell what direction it's facing because I can see the light is being cast on the floor. Let's say I want to point that at the rock, so I can rotate that maybe 90 degrees in this direction. You can see from the appearance of the rect light, and rect stands for rectangular, that it resembles something that's used in real photography and real cinematography, which is a device called a softbox. A softbox allows us to basically control how light is projected. Now, in this case, there are some parameters that you're going to want to know about. Let's set that to movable. And that's movable too, right? I just wanted to just double check. All right, so it has a source width. It looks like I'm on the wrong axis here. So let me rotate 90 degrees in this direction. It has a source width, so I can decide the width of where this is emitting light. So I can do that while looking at the object that it's supposed to be lighting. And maybe I can set the width something like this, okay? And the height will determine how high it's casting light. Now this also has a radius and a brightness control, intensity I should say, just like our other lights do. And this can also be further focused because in what this is very much like in real photography and cinematography, I think the source height might be still a little too high. So let's balance that a little bit better, is that it has barn doors. And barn doors are things that we can increase the size of them and the length of them. Excuse me, the angle and the length. So hopefully you can see what's happening here, okay? If you can imagine that as a solid object, okay? If you want to look at what these really look like, just go online and search for softbox. And a softbox is something that is very, very useful in traditional photography and cinematography for lighting subjects in very controlled ways. So maybe the radius is still a little bit too big now. Now for rect lights, I believe that the shadows are pretty much always going to be soft shadows because this is going to be a relatively large light source compared to the subject. I suppose if I were to make this smaller in size, if I were to actually reduce the height and the width, something smaller, and the light source becomes smaller, get it closer, then you can see those shadows are starting to become harder. But that's not typically how softboxes are used. So let's make that a larger light source again, relative to the object, and it has a normal type of fall off. So those are the main lights that you're going to be using inside and occasionally outside. I want to talk about the skylight, however, and right now that doesn't apply very much in here. So let's just get rid of this rect light for a moment and go outside. Okay, so there is our directional light. And I would like to make sort of like a sunset. So I'm going to search for my directional light. And we're going to do Control L, and I'm going to lower that in the horizon, maybe just having it peek through somewhere. I want to kind of see it, but I don't want to see it very much. That sun disk looks very, very small. So one of the settings for the directional light is called the source angle. And if I increase that, that's going to increase the size of the sun disk. This is in lux, which is a different intensity unit, so I can turn that down. Maybe it's going to be 2 lux. And you'll notice that the sky is darker. Maybe that's too dark. So let's try 3, 4, until we find something that we like. If I wanted to, I could, make this more of like a reddish type of color. And again, being colorblind makes this pretty hard for me, so I'm just going to only do that a little bit. So if I play the game now, you'll see that the outside, especially the outside, can get pretty dark. Okay, so let's lower that intensity even more, or if I were to lower the sun on the horizon even more, let's try that first. Make it even darker. Oops, I lost it. You can see I can make that go underground and then it's super dark. So let's say the sun is there. All right, now if we play the game outside, I can't even see our landscape anymore. If I want my sky to look like this, what I can do is I can use the skylight. I'll search for it, and here is my skylight. And it's set to movable as well, and I can, of course, change its intensity, right? So let's go to intensity scale. And if I want to, I could increase that to a higher number and increase the illumination at the surface of the planet, so to speak. Let's try 8. Let's try 12. And that can give us a lot more control. Even 12, I think, could be raised more. How about 16? Okay, so we now have that. So when I walk around outside, I can see my way around. That'll get even more challenging once we have things like grass and trees and things that are absorbing more of the light. And let's see how we are inside. It's going to be very dark because we haven't actually placed any interior lights yet. I can see that that boulder is still there. walk up to it, and remember, we added collision to that. So in our next lesson, we're going to start decorating this space. We're going to make proper lights. We're going to also make interactable doors that will open and close behind us when we simply walk up to them, and maybe make these windows look nice. We'll create window frames, and we'll use a glass material that is very realistic, and put furnishings into this space, like maybe upstairs that could be a bedroom, or it could be a library. The kitchen's got to have appliances. The living room over here has got to have a sofa and maybe a TV set. And believe me, there are even ways that I can make a TV set in here and have the TV be on and actually playing a show. Don't forget, when you eject, save all, and make sure that your map is saved into your maps directory. One more time, it's located in third person maps right here. And I've got mine saved as house 2, and the project settings under maps and modes, that is the editor startup map and the game default map. So if I were to quit Unreal Engine at this point and then restart, it would bring me back to where I am now. So there's one last thing I wanted to talk to you about before I leave you for this lesson. And this is for those of you who have graphics cards that do support ray tracing. So in order to enable that for various lights, let me just demonstrate that to you with a simple point light. Remember, all of the meshes are movable, and we want the light to be movable as well to enable this. For any light that's in your scene, you can select it and simply search for ray. And it'll say cast ray traced shadows, use project setting. If you want to make sure that that is going to cast ray traced shadows, you simply have to change this to enabled. And that's going to offload the ray tracing onto your GPU. And it will also make your shadows look better. This also goes for things like your directional light. Let me select that. Use project settings. I didn't clear my search, so it's right there. I can enable that. For my skylight, use project setting. It's a lot to remember. So you have to know that in order to take advantage of all of this, you want to make sure that your meshes have their mobility set to movable, that your lights are set to movable, and that for every light that is in your scene, you select it and search for this ray tracing option, cast ray traced shadows, and enable it. If you do not have hardware that supports ray tracing, in other words, you don't have an RTX graphics card, or you have something older in your machine, don't bother with this, and you'll be just fine. But I did want to mention that because some of you do have that hardware. In any case, thank you for being with me for this session, and I will see you next time. Have fun. Bye-bye.